When a life-and-death situation collided with systemic bias, no one was prepared for the fallout. It was close to midnight when Dr. Malcolm Bryant's phone buzzed on his nightstand, jolting him awake. It was one of the few hours of sleep he had managed to squeeze in. He blinked groggily at the screen. When he saw the hospital's number, his heart sank. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. He answered on the second ring. "Malcolm here," he said, sitting up and rubbing his face. The voice on the other end was rushed. "Dr. Bryant, this is Amy from the ER. We've got an emergency. A teenage girl in critical condition. Car accident on Highway 74. It's bad. We need you here ASAP." His pulse quickened. He was one of the only surgeons in Monroe County certified to handle high-risk vascular trauma. If they were calling him now, it meant she didn't have much time. "I'm on my way," he replied, already swinging his legs over the bed, grabbing his keys and slipping into his sneakers. As he sped out of his driveway, his mind raced. Highway 74. How many times had he warned the town council about that stretch of road? Poor lighting, sharp turns, and narrow shoulders made it a death trap, especially for young drivers. His sleek black Tesla cut through the quiet darkness of the town. The hospital was 20 minutes away, but tonight, every second felt like an eternity. Then came another update from the hospital, one that made his stomach drop. The patient was the daughter of Police Chief Richard Holcomb. Malcolm knew Holcomb. They had crossed paths at town events. Holcomb wasn't a bad guy, but Malcolm couldn't ignore the way the man avoided eye contact whenever race was mentioned. But there was no time for that now. A life was on the line. Malcolm tightened his grip on the wheel, weaving through the sparse traffic, praying there would be no delays. But just as he approached an intersection, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. A siren blared. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, his foot instinctively easing off the gas. His heart pounded, not just from urgency, but from something deeper, something he had experienced before. He pulled over, hands gripping the wheel as he rolled down the window. A harsh flashlight beam hit his face, momentarily blinding him. "Do you know how fast you were going?" The officer's voice was clipped and unreadable. Malcolm took a breath, steadying his voice. "I'm a surgeon. I just got an emergency call from the hospital. A young girl is in critical condition. I need to get there now." The officer didn't flinch. Instead, he shined the flashlight into the car, eyeing Malcolm's scrubs and the hospital badge clipped to his pocket. "License and registration," the officer demanded. Malcolm clenched his jaw but complied. "Look, I know I was speeding, but the patient is Police Chief Holcomb's daughter. If I don't get there in time, she could die." The second officer, who had been standing back, stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "And why should we believe you?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Malcolm inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time he'd been doubted, treated with hostility for simply existing in spaces where people didn't think he belonged. "My badge is right here," he said, holding it up. "I'm a surgeon at Monroe County General Hospital. Call them if you need to. But I don't have time for this." The first officer took the badge, inspecting it as his partner stepped back slightly, but didn't relax. Minutes dragged on as they radioed in to verify his identity, ignoring his repeated pleas about the urgency of the situation. Malcolm glanced at the clock on his dashboard. 7 minutes had passed. 7 minutes that could mean the difference between life and death. His hands trembled, not from fear, but sheer frustration. "Officer, I'm begging you," Malcolm said, his voice cracking slightly. "Every second counts. If it were your daughter, you'd want me to go." The first officer finally handed back his documents, but didn't move away from the car. "It's your lucky night," he muttered, though there was no apology in his tone. "Slow down." Malcolm didn't wait for further permission. He pulled back onto the road, tires screeching slightly as he accelerated. The hospital was only 10 minutes away now, but as he raced toward his destination, he had no idea that the night's events wouldn't end there. By the time he reached the ER, Amy was waiting. "She's in critical condition," she said, leading him to the operating room. "Internal bleeding, possible vascular rupture. The paramedics stabilized her, but she's fading fast." Malcolm nodded, slipping into surgical mode. "Let's prep her. We don't have a second to lose." Lying on the operating table, the girl looked small and pale, tangled in wires and tubes. Through the small observation window, Malcolm caught sight of Chief Holcomb, his hands pressed against the glass, his face a mix of fear and helplessness. But there was no time to dwell on that. Malcolm focused on saving her. 2 hours later, the surgery was over. When Malcolm stepped into the hallway, exhausted but relieved, Chief Holcomb was there, pacing back and forth. He froze when he saw Malcolm's blood-stained scrubs. "She's stable," Malcolm said simply. "It was close, but we got her in time. She's in recovery now." Holcomb exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging in relief. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice thick. "Thank you for saving my little girl." Malcolm nodded but didn't walk away. "I almost didn't make it, you know," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Your officers pulled me over. They wasted time questioning whether I even belonged on the road. Time that could have cost your daughter her life." Holcomb's face hardened. "I'll look into it." "That's not good enough," Malcolm replied. "This isn't the first time this has happened to me. But tonight it nearly cost someone their life. Your daughter's life. If that doesn't make you see the problem, I don't know what will." Holcomb didn't respond. The next morning, whispers turned into full-blown conversations as news of the police stop spread. Some defended the officers, saying they were just doing their job. Others couldn't ignore the chilling reality of what had nearly happened. Later that day, Holcomb showed up at the hospital. Standing awkwardly in the lobby, he met Malcolm's gaze. "I owe you more than just a thank you," Holcomb said. "You were right last night. It made me see things differently." Malcolm studied him. "And," Holcomb sighed, "I've ordered mandatory bias training for every officer. I'm personally meeting with community leaders to discuss how we can do better. It's not enough, I know that, but it's a start." Malcolm nodded slowly. "It's a start," he echoed, "but it's going to take more than training. You have to hold people accountable, real accountability." Holcomb hesitated, then nodded. "I understand." Before leaving, he turned back. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did for my daughter, but I promise you, I'm going to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen again. Not on my watch." Malcolm didn't respond right away. "We'll see." That night, he sat on his porch, breathing in the cool air. He thought about the girl he saved, the 7 minutes he lost, the long road ahead. Change didn't come easy, but maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something. Because sometimes it takes a crisis for people to see what's been broken all along. But seeing is just the first step. What happens next is up to all of us.